Richard and Julie with you on a beautiful Wednesday evening, and joining us is our house epidemiologist from the University of Ottawa, Raywat Deonandan. Good evening. As always, a pleasure to have you. Just posted a tweet asking people if before the pandemic they knew what an epidemiologist does. You have voted, and you said?
I was the first one to vote, and I said, yes, I do know, and I hope I'm right.
Well, here's hoping. The two choices were numbers and graphs, oh yes, or oh yeah, and the other one was epidemiology, huh? So we'll see. If your followers don't know, they should know, at least by now, or you have more work to do. Are you surprised that more people understand what you do?
I am surprised. I'm pleased, but also I wrote a book once called Nothing to Do with Skin, all about epidemiology, because people always think you're a skin doctor, epidermis, and now that joke is lost on people because they know what I do, and so I'm a little bit disappointed.
What are you seeing about the latest numbers that have come out, not just from Manitoba, but right across the country?
Things are looking good. Things are looking promising. Of course, there are some hot spots still. Alberta, Quebec, Ontario, and even BC are having some issues still. Most of the cases in Canada are in those 4 provinces. But the doubling time in Canada is lengthening. That's the time it takes to double the number of cases. So it's more than 10 days now. When this epidemic started, it was 1, 2, 3 days. China, when they finally got a hold of their epidemic, it was up to 14, 15 days. So we're almost at that point where we've got a good grasp of the epidemic. So I see things bending in a positive direction.
And things continue in Manitoba. We're seeing fewer cases, and we're also seeing the number of active cases continually dropping each and every day. So when that starts to happen, governments start to talk about reopening. Does that have any concern for you when you look at the numbers?
Well, it's a little early, but we have to have that conversation now, obviously. So most of the projections say that the bulk of this wave of the epidemic will be through North America by the end of June. So we should see some reopening of the economy by July at the latest, probably by early June, I would think. And it's going to look differently in different parts of the country, and the timing will be different in different parts of the country because it's not just one epidemic, it's many epidemics in different provinces. But to answer your question, of course, I'm concerned. And so I'm pleased to see that the WHO has issued a set of criteria for when we should consider opening up the economy. And I'm pleased that most leaders are looking at this as a staged release. It's not throw the doors wide open. It's more of a dimmer switch. You open a little bit, see what happens, a little more, see what happens, maybe dim it down again if things are getting too rough, then play it by ear.
And you really need cooperation. I think, and we can speak well, Julie and I, about Winnipeg and Manitoba, and then observations of what we've seen through global news and other sources. But we've had a very cool spring. It's starting to warm up now. I think we're pretty good at adhering to the law, the few exceptions here and there and the requests. But the key is that slow reopening and realize and have that cooperation that if we go a little too far, we have to pull it back. And knowing when to say enough is enough. And is there a handbook on that? You mentioned the WHO report, but is there a sense from your perspective, your perch, that we know how to do this? Is this going to be more trial and error?
It's going to be trial and error. No one has done this before, at least not this scale. And one of the interesting things about all this is up until now, this has been an epidemiologist task, a medical professional task. But now it becomes the task of administrators, public leaders, communicators, media people like yourself to get on board and to help usher us through this next phase. Because this is going to be more about public communication and, as you say, partnership from this point out. The epidemiologists have done our job for the most part. Now we need creativity from the managers and the administrators to think about staggered work hours, think about different ways of deploying testing, communicating to workers, getting people on board, those kinds of things. So it'll be curious to see where the creativity comes from and who can step up and lead.
I was on a conference call earlier today, and the suggestion was that if you are an office worker and you can continue to stay working from home, you're going to stay home. If you are a restaurateur, you better be prepared in your restaurant that seats maybe 75 to handle maybe 20 to 25 people. Those types of creative solutions here, that this is going to be slow and it's going to be staged. And like you say, that if we go a little bit too far, you have to be prepared to step back. And it is a combination of decisions led by committee, led by politicians, with the consultation of people like yourself here, and realizing that hopefully you don't make too many mistakes.
Yeah, and we can learn some things looking around the world. California announced that when they open up their restaurants, they'll probably expect to sit the tables very far apart and expect the waiters to be wearing full hazmat gear or something resembling it. I don't know what they're going to do about the shared public bathrooms, because those are possible conduits to infection as well. We look at NASA. NASA is still launching spaceships, but they're offering staggered work hours to minimize the number of people on site at a given time, and they are encouraging everyone to work from home if they can. Obviously, astronauts can't. And so everyone is looking at creative solutions. This past couple of days, we saw Emirates Airlines actually conducted quick blood tests on all passengers getting on the plane. It was a flight from Dubai to Tunisia, I think. So that's the first example of a private entity using a rapid test on site to enable their business to function. What's unclear is what would they do if someone tested positive? Right? Do they get quarantined? Do they get ushered off? Does everyone else in the room get quarantined as well? So while the tests, it's possible for the test to have the appropriate technological presence to allow us to do these things, we need the management wherewithal to know what to do with the test results. So imagine if we open up a bar and there's a rapid test on site and the bouncer gives you a test before you get in. What happens if you test positive? Right? We have to think about these things and what it all means before we can just simply rely on the technology to get us out of it.
When it comes to research, have you seen anything from your colleagues around the world about reinfection? Are we starting to see, or do we know of any cases at this point of people who have had COVID-19 who have had it a second time?
That's very unclear. And we have some cases in China and in North Korea. And it seems that a lot of this is confounded by the failure of the test. For example, people we think have recovered because they've gotten 2 tests 24 hours apart showing negative presence of the virus, and then a couple of weeks later they test again and they show a positive presence. It's unclear if they got reinfected, if a dormant virus was reactivated, or, and I think this is likely the case, or the first tests were in fact false negatives. The tests we have right now on the market aren't great, and they're being refined every day. So we know they come in 2 types. There's the antigen test, as we call it, the swab that we test for the presence of the virus, and then there's the blood test, the test for the antibodies. And everybody wants the antibody test because the antibody test is fast and it allows us to figure out if you've been infected in the past. But it has really questionable false negative and false positive rates, which is causing chaos in how we assess the data. And even the regular nasal swab test that we all are familiar with to some extent in this country for testing for COVID has a high false negative rate. So until those things can be worked out, it's really not possible to speak conclusively and authoritatively about reinfection. But my personal opinion is that reinfection is highly unlikely in the short term. Maybe months later, but definitely not weeks later. That's my opinion, and I could be wrong. We'll wait for the data to see that. But that's why in China and South Korea, they're investigating this quite in depth to figure it out.
It's all going to be very interesting, and I'm quite sure we'll be speaking with you again throughout the days and weeks to come as there's still much research and a lot to still be figured out. Make sure you check out. Where can people check out your work?
Go to my blog, my website, mylastname.com, Deonandan.com.
Deonandan. Thanks as always for joining us. Raywat Deonandan is an epidemiologist. He is our house epidemiologist from the University of Ottawa. Have a great night.